welcome to the HarperFiction Masterclass on writing best-selling science fiction and fantasy. I am Natasha Bardon, Publishing Director of HarperVoyager, the science fiction and fantasy imprint of HarperCollins Publishers. We publish the likes of George R.R. Martin, Robin Hobb, Jade Kristoff, Hester Grant, Sabathir, and many more. I am joined by the brilliant Juliet Mushens of Mushens Entertainment. Juliet, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me, Tash. So my name is Juliet Mushens and I run my own agency, Mushens Entertainment, where I represent a broad and diverse list of writers from record-breaking international #1 bestseller Richard Osman to Jessie Burton, who wrote The Miniaturist, to New York Times bestselling fantasy writer Taryn Matharu, and I have a host of brilliant fantasy authors published by Natasha. So recently Sarah El-Arifi with her The Final Strife trilogy, which is coming out in 2022. Brilliant Peter Newman, British Fantasy Society award-winning author Jen Williams, Steve Arion, really a whole host across the board of fantasy writers. And actually, little known fact, I started my career at HarperVoyager. So the first place I worked was HarperVoyager, and I set up the HarperVoyager Twitter some 12, 13, quite a lot of years ago now.
Still going strong?
Still going strong, started by yours truly.
We didn't overlap, just in case anyone wonders that. So what I think is a good place to start is that we've reeled off a lot of authors who are best-selling. And best-selling is a tricky label because it can mean so many things. What do you feel like there is a defining quality of all of them? This is probably a no, yeah, but just that kind of threads through.
I would say that great storytelling. I know that's very, very general as a thing to say, but I do think great storytelling, and I think great storytelling shines through whether it's a big, epic second world fantasy with multiple points of view like George R.R. Martin, or whether it's an African-inspired epic fantasy like The Final Strife by Sarah El-Arifi, or it's slightly French Revolution-y like Court of Miracles. I think that one of the great things about Voyager, and also about the SFF I represent too, is that even though you can take hugely diverse worlds, you can have spaceships, you can have dragons, you can have direwolves, but you have people you believe in and people you care about, and you want to go on a journey with them.
I think we've just answered that entire HarperFiction Masterclass, so we're done. But just going back to that, I guess it's about breaking down those boundaries that are a barrier to a story resonating with people. Mm-hmm. And particularly, I think that can be particularly difficult in science fiction and fantasy because you are in that other world. And do you have any tips that you've given your authors over the years about how you can make a story more relatable when it is in such a different environment?
Sure, I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm also going to make you answer it in a minute as well to get your insight. And what I always say to my authors is to come back to character, because even if a character is in a totally fantastical setting, they're still going to have things that they want and still going to have things that they desire, and those need to be things that we can understand, whether that's a kind of quest for power or it's a quest to avenge, a parent's death, or it's that they want to overthrow a kind of unfair ruling system. Even though these might not be things we ourselves will ever experience or go through, they are things we can understand on some level. And I think that for me, where SFF loses me a little bit is if it's just, I'm thrown into a ton of like made up kind of worlds and names and things, and I just have no idea which way is up, when actually you can put me in a setting that is totally fantastical and full of magic, but if I can understand and believe in the characters, then it feels like it's something that I want to kind of invest in, I suppose. And what about you? What do you tell your authors to overcome this?
I think it's exactly the same for me. I think when I love a book, it becomes one of my favourites, not even necessarily just books I work on, but it's always because of the character. It's always character-led. It's always because the character has resonated with me, and that's what keeps me coming back as well. And I think that escapism now more than ever, particularly with lockdown, particularly with where the world is something that I have retreated to, and I've retreated into books that I know will give me that, and I can go on that journey with them. And I think it's the same with favourite television and films, really. Yeah. But do you feel like that? Do you feel like there's a book that you can escape into because of the characters, they've become friends over the years rather than...
Yeah, definitely. I always feel, I know it's a cliche, but I always feel when I finish reading Lord of the Rings, I'm genuinely sad. Like when they go across the sea with the elves, I'm like, no, come back. Like, you're my
great time.
Frodo, I want us to hang out some more. Like, I definitely feel that. And I think with all of the best SFF, the characters do feel really real to you. I read something recently which I absolutely loved. I read N.K. Jemison's short story collection, and something I thought was so impressive about that was, even though they're short stories, so we're not with the characters for very long, and the settings are, you know, sprawling, and there's high kind of space opera, and then there's proper fantasy, there's historical fantasy, there's slightly steampunk. Every character felt real to me, and I probably could have spent an entire novel with every single character. And that's why I say, for me, it always kind of comes back to character. And I think in SFF, we think of those characters that stay with us. I mean, for me, like Fitz Chivalry Farseer, like he's someone that I will always wonder how he's doing. Oh, I mean, not now, but you know, for years.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. But yeah, you know, you always wonder to yourself, they feel so real to you, and you kind of want them to be okay, even though you probably know they're not going to be okay because the writer's going to throw all sorts of conflict and drama at them. But yeah, it's I think that's one of the things I love the most about SFF, is because they're traditionally trilogies, we get longer with the characters. So with other genres, you might get one book with a character or maybe two, but with SFF, I know I'm going to get 3, and that's such a treat to get to spend time with these people and to really kind of get under their skin. What do you think it is about SFF that lends itself to trilogies? I'm always interested in this.
Oh, Tolkien. I think he started that trend. It's actually something I always talk to my authors about when I'm going into buying a trilogy, or at the start of a trilogy when we're doing edit. A question I always tend to ask is, do you feel that you need 3 books to tell this story? Like, how many, like, why, and why do you? Because I think the second book actually is a really interesting part of the publishing process, where you've been working for so long on one book and you've had all of this time, and there wasn't much pressure apart from your own pressure that you're putting on yourself. And then authors tend to get booked to book 2, and there are deadlines, and there are publishing plans, and there are, when's it coming, when's your first draft, etc., etc. So I think having that really good foundation of why you need several, like 3, could be upwards of 3 books. You know, there tend to be really long series. I'm thinking of like Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time, etc., etc. Why do you need every single book to tell that story? And I think they all need to be contained, have enough of a cliffhanger to keep it going, but be satisfying on their own. Is that something you do? Yeah,
I think that's very true, and it's something I talk about a lot with my authors, that with trilogies you still need to wrap them up to some extent at the end of book 1, because some people will just read book 1 and they won't read book 2 and they won't read book 3. And then there are some people who might even pick up book 2 not realizing it's book 2 in a trilogy. And so you need to have a story arc that in some ways is contained, but equally that you're sewing through lots of things that you're going to pick up later in the narrative. And I think sometimes with unpublished writers, they say to me, well, I can't change this in book 1 because this is really important in book 2 or book 3. And I always say, but there's not going to be a book 2 or book 3 unless book 1 gets picked up and unless book 1 does well. So you want to make sure that, you know, you're not cheating the reader, that the reader who just reads book 1 still has an enjoyable reading experience. And yes, they can kind of pick up on book 2 and pick up on book 3 and find out what's going to happen, but they still have to feel that something has been solved and something has been wrapped up in the first one. And do you feel like during lockdown you've had more submissions than normal, that you're buying more, that you're not buying as much? How do you think it's affected you on the publishing side?
I feel like it's the question I was going to ask you, actually, because I think that lockdown's kind of affected people in one of 2 ways. Either they've been incredibly productive and have this amazing side hustle now where they're coming out of it with a whole new business, or they've just felt really demotivated and haven't been able to actually pursue, for whatever reason, things that they're passionate about because of childcare, like various reasons. I feel like I've seen fewer submissions, but I also feel like it's harder for me to get really get into a book at the moment, like even if it's a submission or just a like published novel. I've really struggled. I have bought a few things that I can't talk about that hopefully will go on to be best-selling, but obviously we together have The Final Strife by Sarah El Arifi. So like that's something I'm really excited about, and I think that we always talk about in publishing where you get those books and you just know it's a book that you have to publish. And with that one, that was definitely something I actually needed, like for my mental health and just work. I just needed to reignite that passion and that excitement again. But do you feel like you're getting a lot of lockdown novels, not necessarily about pandemics, but
yeah, I think in the early few weeks of the pandemic I got a lot of pandemic novels. Now obviously they can't have been written during the pandemic,
no.
that would have been so quick, but my suspicion is quite a lot of people maybe had a novel in a drawer that was about a pandemic and they suddenly thought, oh actually this is going to be really timely, so I'm going to send it out. Whereas actually I, who at the time like was recovering from COVID, was in quarantine, did not really want to be reading that kind of thing. But yes, I feel that I've definitely got more submissions than usual, and quite a few people have even said in their submissions, you know, I'm sending this because life's too short, and actually I've been sitting on this for ages, or finally, obviously it depends, some people have had far less time than usual, but you know, saying actually, you know what, I have more time than usual and I've always wanted to write a book, so I've finally got one.
Doing it.
So that's been really interesting. And I've sold a lot during lockdown. That's the other thing I was going to say, is that I think I've sold 8 debuts during lockdown, and all of them have been preempts or auctions, which I also think is interesting, because I mean, look, that's a great hit rate, but it's definitely better than I would say I would normally expect in a year.
Being modest there, Julia.
And I think that a big reason for that is that publishers are looking forward. So right now we don't quite know what's going to happen. We don't quite know what the book market's going to look like in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. So the only way we'll be able to come out the other side is if we're focusing on a really robust publishing program. And I also think that stuff that has, you know, stuff that is very compelling, that is very commercial, is standing out right now because people are thinking, oh, this, I can see a really exciting commercial opportunity here and I want something to feel excited about. So I've probably also offered representation more than I usually
Have you?
do. Yeah.
That's really, and do you feel like that there has been, in your taste, something that you're looking for, or that has?
I think it's been about escaping. I think that I've been looking for things to escape into, and I feel that that's been true of editors as well, that they're really looking for books that they can escape into. So I feel like if it's maybe something about, you know, a flu epidemic or a big virus, that's not necessarily something that people are going to want.
It's a reminder, isn't
it? Because it's a reminder. It's not a, oh, I'm going to forget about everything whilst I'm reading this book. And I think in some ways, working in SFF, we're probably lucky because maybe we have the most escapist novels.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, yeah. Sorry.
I was just going to say, have you seen kind of more buyers coming out the market? Because I know you had a big Sunday Times bestseller with Court of Miracles. So do you feel like people are buying more fantasy right now?
I think it has been a struggle for the entire industry. Like, I mean, COVID shut down supermarkets, shut down shops, but I think that there has been a real trend to that escapism, and be it kind of Netflix, be it Amazon, be it books, people are kind of hungry for it. And I think that particularly with Court of Miracles, it's just such a brilliant book to lose yourself in and to just be transported to another world, but with enough familiarity that you don't get lost in the details of like a whole different environment. So like books like Kester Grant is a great example of a book that does that, where it takes the familiar but twists it on its head and turns it into something completely new. And there have been examples of that over the last few years. Like I think The Martian as well does it really well, in that it's a very obviously out of this world book, but has characters that really drive you along, and at its heart it's about getting back to family. So do you feel like there is a element of science fiction and fantasy that needs to be familiar, and what do you think that familiarity needs to come from to make it
that's so interesting? I don't know if I necessarily think it has to be familiar, because I think a lot of my favourite SFF novels feel really different to anything I've read before. So they feel, you know, quite different, whether it's in setting or whether it's in kind of plot or the magical system or whatever. But I think it always, for me, and I know I keep banging on about this, it is about that character. So it has to be characters we understand and we like. And I'm someone,
feeling.
yeah, and I'm someone, to be honest, who loves a trope in fantasy, but I also love a subversion of a trope. So I love a kind of like enemies to lovers, or like a kind of like wizened old man that's like secretly a really badass warrior. Like, I'm a big fan of those kind of things, but also ways to turn them on their head. And I think that lots of readers across the genre look for things that are familiar but a little bit different. So they want the kind of reading experience they've had before, but kind of twisted in a slightly different way. What have you read recently that you've liked, not for work?
Thursday Murder Club, though technically I had read that before, but Hamnet as well I really enjoyed. It was just something a bit different. What else have I read? I can't think, top of my head. Bethany Ratter's Melt My Heart, which was really great, lovely, and just I needed something like that kind of escapism. But what about you?
I have read recently, I'm currently reading Luster,
really?
which I'm really enjoying, which is out from Picador, I think in January. And I just read The Vanishing Half by Bennett, which was a big New York Times bestseller, about twin girls in America who are black but white passing, and one of them decides to pass as white, and it's about the impact that has on their family for generations to come. And I found that, again, it was very, I was escaping into a narrative, I guess, but it was kind of that I was forgetting about kind of the everyday and just focusing on the characters and what I was reading about and the journey they were going on. But I think everyone's been a bit different during lockdown in terms of if they've been feeling creative or not creative. Some of my authors have felt really creative, some haven't. I think it's important to give yourself a break rather than sitting at a table for 8 hours a day thinking, when will I be able to write? But equally, something I always come back to with my authors is trying to make writing a habit. So whether you're writing first thing in the morning or last thing at night. So one of my authors writes from like 9 p.m. to midnight every night. She has a full-time, very busy government job, but 9 p.m. to midnight is her writing time. And that's what she does every single week. Or others of my authors get up really early at 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. That's when they write, or they write in their lunch break. Or sometimes it's just each week I have to write 1,000 words, or each week I have to write 5,000 words. And I think that just making it a habit. So on average, it takes 66 days to form a habit. That's the average time it takes to stop something feeling like something you're making yourself do and something that actually you just naturally do. So I'm a big believer in like a 66-day goal. So at the moment, I'm on day 12 of a 40-minute walk every day. That's one of my 66-day goals, which is a good one. But I think just sitting down every day, even if it's just writing 200 words, or, you know, not having to be chained to the desk for 8 hours, but just every day, if you sit down and try and write something, that could be on the notes app on your phone. One of my clients used to write when she had twin babies. She would go to the park with them because they would only sleep in their pushchair, and she would just write on the notes app of her phone whilst they were sleeping. And I think I remember Peter V. Brett, who's a HarperVoyager novelist who's a big bestseller, he wrote his first novel in the notes app of his phone whilst he was commuting to and from work. So it's about carving out time and making it a habit. And I think that that's a really useful thing to do and a really useful thing to think about.
I think we've talked a lot about character as well, and I think something that I always ask my authors to do, particularly when they've got several characters in a novel who are all POV, but I think it helps regardless, is to write personality, just a little bit about their personality, like a personality profile for each character. And I think that really helps across long series as well, because you get to establish that arc and you get to see, okay, this is where they've started out, this is where I want their character to end. And it's not necessarily about changing their personality, but it's about how will that character react in that way. to whatever situation.
How will that character grow? Because I think it's quite unsatisfying as a reader or as a viewer as well if a character at the end of a situation is exactly the same. It's like they've learned nothing. They've basically gone through all of this, they're exactly the same as they were. And I think it's much more interesting as a reader if we can see someone change and grow. So my favorite example of that, which is the one I always talk about, is Malta in the Live Ship trilogy by Robin Hobb. And I start those novels every time. You hate Malta, you literally hate her, and by the end of the novel, Malta is a very different person to the one she was when she began, and she's still prickly and not perfect, but you understand her, you care about her, and you understand why she's changed and how she's changed. And I think that that's something that is really important to think about. I remember my husband, who's also a fantasy novelist published by Voyager, he always talks about the Kurt Vonnegut saying, which is that every character should want something, even if it's only a glass of water. And I think it's asking yourself, what does your character want? Do they want a happy ending? Do they want a quiet life? Do they want to defeat the bad guy? Do they want to overthrow the empire? Their wants can be really little, or they can be really big, but they must have some.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it makes them more human and makes them more relatable. We are swiftly running out of time. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we've got some audience participation questions coming in. But how do you know? So I'm a new author, debut, never written before, finished my novel. How do I know it's finished and should be sent to you?
So I always say do 3 drafts of your first book before you send it out to agents. Now that's not a hard and fast rule. Obviously there are some authors that do 2 drafts and it's great, and some authors who do, you know, like 5 drafts before they send it out. But generally I think at least 3. So I would say finish the book, put it away for a month in a chest of drawers or something, or shut your laptop, don't look at it, and that month will give you some distance from it. Because I think if you start editing as soon as you finished it, you either think everything is terrible or everything is great. And actually once you've got a month's distance from it, you start to see it with kind of clearer eyes. So I really think that that's a good piece of advice I would give to writers. I also think once you've had that distance from it and, you know, you start looking at it again and you start editing it, try and read it in a format different to the one you wrote it in. So I would always suggest that you perhaps put it on a Kindle and you read it like a reader, or you print it out, or you read it aloud, and you will definitely start to see the boring bits and the exciting bits. So if you're skimming the first 50 pages, do they need to be the first 50 pages? Or you might reach a point and be like, why would she do that? Oh, it's just because it's convenient for the plot. Then probably that's something you need to fix. And I think do at least 3 drafts before you send it out. Lots of people ask if they should pay for an edit. I really don't think you need to, but if you want to pay for an edit, just make sure you've done your research and that there's someone with good testimonials who you can imagine will actually give you some really helpful feedback.
When you have become a bestseller and like you've had your first book, your debut, it's very exciting, but now you're an old hat and you are writing your second book. How do you, because I think this is really interesting because no one really talks about this next stage. How do you, I don't know how to phrase it. What advice would you give nervous best-selling authors on their second book? Because obviously once you've been successful, ideally you want to repeat that success, and I think then there's a lot of pressure that builds up around that.
So I always suggest to my writers, they don't always manage this, but I always suggest it, that they finish book 2 before book 1 comes out. And actually a lot of my authors have finished book 2 by the time book 1 comes out, or they've got the bulk of it done. And I think that makes a big difference because you're writing with the pressure off you. Also, you've got more time because you're not having to do blog tours or Zoom events or signings or things like that. But I tend to think, and the way I talk about it with my authors is that you can't let the noise affect you. You can't write a book for everyone else. You can't look at your reviews and be like, they said this, so I'll try and do this. But it's, you know, it's tricky. I think for book 1, you can sometimes be writing it for 6 years, and then book 2, you've got 6 months, well, not 6 months, but like, you know, you've got a year or whatever to turn it around.
Sometimes 6 months though.
Yeah, so I think that getting as much of book 2 done before book 1 comes out makes a big difference. And actually a couple of my recent best-selling authors, they'd handed in book 2 by the time book 1 came out, and that I think will stand them in great stead because it means actually they're not thinking, their head's not being turned by what people are saying, and they've actually already done the work. But yeah, obviously not always possible, but trying to get as much down of something else as you can, I think, is really good.
So, questions from fans or just generally people who want to know some information. Okay, so questions from the audience. How many submissions do you receive? We've covered that, but how many do you receive on average, I guess, would be a good...
I get between 5,000 and 6,000 a year.
Well, quite a few. So,
books.
Yeah. So really important to read your submission guidelines and make sure.
Yeah. Read my submission guidelines, edit your book again, make sure it's a good fit for me. But I would say I do read all my submissions and I sign new authors. So I've offered representation 10 times this year. So actually, you know, I'm always looking for new talent. And in the same way that publishers are always looking for new talent, we've talked about shoring up publishing lists for years to come. So don't be put off by that terrifying number, because, you know, lots of people on my list were where you are right now.
Also, we've got how important, we've also got how important is a synopsis?
So I think a synopsis is useful for the writer as well, to learn, you know, what is my arc, where is the story going? And also, I'm afraid to say, you will be expected to write them even if you are a big best-selling novelist. You're still then expected to send your publisher the synopsis for the next idea. So, you know, I think that definitely it can be tricky, but it's something you've got to get used to. It normally, for me, I only read the synopsis if I'm on the fence. So if I'm reading something and I'm thinking, this is really interesting, but I'm not sure where it goes, or this is really, you know, or this feels a bit quiet, or I'm not sure what genre it is, that's when I look at a synopsis. But normally it's just helpful for the author as well as for the agent, I would say, to write one.
I would say it's also really helpful for the publisher for pitching, because obviously we've read it in acquisitions, but then we have to pitch the whole department, and it's just really helpful to kind of get your thoughts in order. And then even later on when you're looking at copy, etc. So yeah, I agree. I think it's really important. Can you name, this is very tricky, so I appreciate if you can't do this one. Can you name books that you've worked on or discovered that you're particularly proud of? And that's a bit like
I don't think I'm allowed to say books I'm particularly proud of, because I think it makes me sound like kind of I'm a mother and I'm like, that's the best child, that one right there, Tommy, he's the fave, the other one, bit crap. No, I don't think I can do that, but I will mention a couple of books that I've, you know, got out or I've got coming out. So we've obviously talked about Sarah El-Arifi's The Final Strife, which I'm really excited about. I've also got a novel coming out from Orion called To Fill a Yellow House by a British Ghanaian writer called Susie Annie, which is about the unlikely friendship between a young second generation immigrant and the man who runs a local charity shop, which was just a kind of love letter to British dying high street, but also characters who are so different, but you care about them so much in different ways. And then obviously have to give a little shout out to the Thursday Murder Club, because it is selling like hotcakes. And you know, all of my authors, to be honest, I love them all, or I wouldn't have signed them and I wouldn't work with them. What about you, Tash? Who are your favourites?
I also am going to not answer that question, but we do have some great stuff coming out next year, which I'm really excited about. So I've got Thread Needle by Carrie Thomas, which is, I'm a bit of a sucker for an alternate London, and this is like a magical London that's hidden, which I absolutely love. It's all about not magic and witches, and it's brilliant fun. And then Meet Me in Another Life by Katrina Sylvie, which is coming out in the summer, which is a story of Flora and Santi, and they keep meeting in different iterations. Like in one, she's a student teacher, in another they're both at university, and they keep meeting each other and they're really drawn to each other, and that mystery is just like, why does this keep happening? I absolutely love that. So I'm really excited about those two. Thank you. And we've also got Peter Brett, who we've mentioned, the start of his new series, The Desert Prince. So 2021, I think we're all looking forward to for very different reasons. But
it's gonna be a busy year. I've got so many books coming out. And actually one other I will mention is a debut called Ariadne, which I know Tash loved, which is coming out next year from Headline, which is a retelling of the Ariadne myth, but a feminist retelling from Ariadne and her sister Phaedra's perspective. So yeah, really exciting stuff.
Before we keep rattling on all of the different
I know, literally I've got like 50 clients. I'm going to be like, and another one.
yeah, so I'm going to stop us there. We're not allowed any more. But another question that we've got in is about trends, and have you seen any coming in?
Well, I've talked about how I'm seeing a lot of kind of pandemic fiction, but I would also say I'm seeing more space opera than normal. So one of my authors, Laura Lamb, she co-authored a novel called Seven Devils with Elizabeth May, and they were number 5 in the Sunday Times bestseller list, which was really exciting. And that was a space opera, and I feel like maybe off the back of Star Wars, I don't know, but I feel like I'm seeing kind of more space opera at the moment than before, and I really like space opera, so that's quite exciting. What about you, Tash?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of, actually going back to Ariadne, there's a lot of Greek myth retellings, which I like. Circe, I love all of them, and I thought Ariadne was brilliant, so I'm really looking forward to it, and I think how they're publishing it is really great as well. Really great to see. I've seen a lot of horror. I don't know whether, not necessarily just pandemic horror, but I've seen a lot of horror come through, which I think is really interesting, and maybe a way of authors working through what we're living in at the moment. But I'd actually love to see some more in that kind of Get Out vein, contemporary horror, not just gothic and houses, which I also love. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. Seen a lot of short stories, actually, like short story collections, which I think is really interesting. Do you have any insight into why you think that might be? Or
no, I mean, I don't accept short stories, and I would say that in America, short stories and short story collections there's such a strong literary tradition of that, and we just don't have that in the same way here.
Yeah, no, I know. I do wonder if it's a kind of attention thing as well, like in needing that hit of a story, but not necessarily wanting to commit for a longer form. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see more of that coming through, because as you say, not really a tradition here. But massive in America. That's all I've got. I don't know if there's any pearls of wisdom you want to add. I mean, everyone's had enough. Maybe they should see it on the next HarperFiction Masterclass. But,
please subscribe, please comment on the blog.
So thank you so much for joining me and having a lovely chat. It's been great. I'd like to say good luck to all the aspiring authors out there. Thank you so much for joining us. And as Juliet did say, if you really enjoyed this content, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's going to be plenty more HarperFiction Masterclasses, and we're really excited to cover all of the topics that are going to help you write your next best-selling novel. So thank you so much.